Welcome, very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Perceptive Learning Zone. And today we will dwell on an abstract philosophical topic that is all about discovering purpose in life. So today I want to talk a bit about Epicureanism, Epicureanism, Epicureanism. So what is it basically? It is an ancient philosophical belief, right, that happiness comes from living simply, right? So throughout history, you got philosophers as well as psychologists who have pondered and scrutinized the notion of happiness in intricate detail, right? So Epicurus was a Greek philosopher, right? He lived between 341 and 270 BC, that is before Christ, and he was one of the great minds to focus on this concept, right? That is, especially we talk about simplicity, friendship, as well as community, right? So now, in simple terms, Epicureanism is what we call an approach to life, right? It is an approach to life that makes sure that happiness is something that is shared, especially when you sort of abstain from your desires, and that way, you just sort of try to attain inner peace in life, right? So now, if you talk about Epicurus, right, he agreed with other philosophers that happiness is our ultimate human pursuit. However, he suggested something very different, I would say, than others had proposed regarding how it would reflect in our decision making and our behavior models, right? So many philosophers they have suggested that experiencing pleasure and happiness it meant basically indulging as well as enjoying things to excess, right? Now, Epicurus, on the other hand, suggested that pleasure was found in simple living. And at a glance, he suggests, right, from a distance, we feel that he is suggesting finding joy in life's simple pleasures. So this basically includes finding a sense of community as well as practicing moderation, virtue, and temperance, right? In modern life, this basically translates to minimalism. That is living modestly, saving money, refraining from negative thoughts and enhancing one's level of positivity in life. So there's an illustration, right, about Epicurean belief that talks about the need to experience tranquility. So Epicurus suggested that we would seek knowledge of how the world works and limit our desires, right? So for Epicurus, the pleasure was sort of obtained through things such as abstaining from bodily desires, community friendship, acquiring knowledge, living a virtuous and temperate life, as well as practicing moderation in all things. Now, I want to touch on the concept of temperate, right? What does this word imply, right? So the term temperate, as in living a temperate life, it basically means experiencing a mild or modest style, right? So now, when we talk a bit more about it, what we feel is that that although he suggested, I would say, although he suggested that we are motivated to seek pleasure, right? Epicurus had a much different idea of what looked like in daily living, right? So his perspective and teaching has actually been referred to as serene hedonism, right? So what do we mean by hedonism? Now, in philosophy, the term hedonism, it refers to the notion that pleasure is the most important pursuit of mankind and the source of all that is good. So people who are considered hedonists are those who make it their life's mission, their ultimate agenda to experience maximum amount of pleasure. So their decision making and behaviors are all motivated by the desire to simply experience pleasure. So Epicurus suggested there are three states that constitute happiness, right? You got tranquility, then you got freedom from fear. Freedom from fear has a technical term that is known as ataraxia. And then there is absence of bodily pain that is basically known as aponia. So it is this combination of factors that would ultimately allow people to experience happiness at the highest level, right? And that is sort of interesting, right? Because although it may seem impossible to attain or sustain, there are people who, believe it or not, do follow Epicurean beliefs and they seek to experience this level of happiness in their lives. Now, there is one factor that Epicurus suggested has the power to destroy pleasure, which is anxiety about our future. So, although he suggested that this has more to do with not fearing death. The idea that we would be fearful about anything in our future was actually considered as a barrier or an obstacle to our experience of pleasure, tranquility, as well as happiness. So he identified two types of pleasure, right? Moving pleasure as well as static. And he described two arenas of pleasure and pain, that is physical and mental, right? So moving pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, it refers to actively being in the process of satisfying a desire. So an example of this could be eating food when you feel hungry. So in these moments, we are acting towards our intended goal of pleasure. And the other type of pleasure is static pleasure that refers to the experience we have once our desire is met. So to use the example of eating food when we're hungry, I would say in this scenario, in this context, the static pleasure, it would be what we are feeling once we have eaten. The satisfaction of feeling full and no longer being in need would be a static pleasure, right? So Epicureanism, it suggests that static pleasures are the preferred form of pleasure. So physical pleasures and pains have to do with the present, and mental pleasures and pains, well, they have to do with the past as well as the future, right? So examples of this could include positive memories of past events or experiences that bring us feelings of joy or pleasure, or conversely, unpleasant memories of our past that bring us pain. So when we look to the future, we can feel hopeful or fearful, experiencing either pleasure or pain about what is to come, right? Then next up, Epicurus, he identified three types of desires, right? The first type is natural and necessary desires. So examples of this could include things like food and shelter. These things are easier to satisfy and hard or virtually impossible to eliminate from our lives. Then the second category is natural and non-necessary desires. This refers to things like gourmet foods and luxury goods. They represent things that are harder to satisfy, and they're likely to end up causing us pain as a result of unfulfilled desires. So Epicurus suggested that it is, best to minimize or eliminate altogether these type of desires in order to seek tranquility. And third category he talks about is vain and empty desires. So examples of these include things like power, status, wealth, or fame. And these are difficult things to obtain or achieve and less likely to satisfy even if we end up achieving them, right? So Epicurus argues that because there is no limit to these desires, they could never fully satisfy or bring pleasure. Therefore, by extension, we are not motivated, to fulfill these desires in order to help ourselves achieve greater happiness and pleasure. And Epicureanism, well, this school of thought, this philosophy, it emphasizes the importance of friendship. In fact, Epicurus suggested that friendship was one of the greatest means of obtaining pleasure. He believed that connection with friends, it offers I would say, a sense of safety, right? Whereas lack of connection, it can lead to isolation, it can lead to despair as well as severe peril, right? Now, I would say that although our modern culture, it tends to emphasize the idea of individualistic living, where being self-contained and not reliant on others may be perceived as a strength, Epicurus, on the other hand, believes that strength is found in connection and friendship with others, right? Courage. So, for example, that movie Into the Wild, right? Initially, it says that as human beings, we think we don't deserve love. We drift into dark corners, filling out the empty spaces of our past. But after staying away from human civilization for a long time, we virtually came to the conclusion that human interaction was necessary in order to live a life of meaning and purpose, right? So, strength is found in connection and friendship. And he also believed that courage is a highly regarded virtue. With regard to friendship, he even suggested that one should be courageous enough to lay down one's life for a friend. Now, Epicureanism in modern living life is uncertain, and ultimately, we cannot avoid pain or vulnerability, ladies and gentlemen. We will encounter both because that is a crucial part of our, I would say, human experience. So living positively and seeking to maintain a peace, happiness, and tranquility can still be a driving desire as we sort of navigate through our life experiences right now. While the Epicureanism philosophy suggests that the goal of life is happiness, It also recognizes that sometimes pleasure can lead to pain, and that sometimes pain is necessary in order to achieve happiness. We all know that saying that if pain wasn't a blessing, God Almighty wouldn't have given it to his most beloved subjects, that were the prophets, right? So, in an effort to live more positively, we can incorporate Epicurean beliefs into our, I would say, way of life, as well as our personal decision making models. So, of the ideas described and outlined by Epicurus in his time, a common concern is related to personal choice. We cannot always avoid pain and feelings of fear, but possibly he suggests that we can choose to, or choose not to stay in pain and fear. This may mean that we sort of, what's the right word for it? We declutter our living environment. We rid ourselves of expectations. We stop attaching happiness to things like status, wealth, or fame, and sort of reframe our, I would say, limiting beliefs, right? So, what some people, I would say, may have referred to as tranquil and temperate living back then, it may be recognized more in the modern times in the 21st century as minimalism. Now, minimalism is being practiced in a lot of countries, a lot of first world countries I might add, like Japan, for instance, right? So minimalism suggests that by living with less, we can actually encounter greater peace and freedom. So, as Epicurus suggested, right, that freedom from unnecessary possessions, well, it allows greater freedom of fear. It allows freedom from worry, freedom from depression or regret, and importantly, freedom from expectations. Now, there were a couple of minimalists, right, by the name of Joshua Fields Milburn as well as Ryan Nicodemus, who write that, and I quote, minimalism is a tool to rid yourself of life's excess in favor of focusing on what is important so that you can ultimately find happiness, fulfillment, as well as freedom, unquote. Now, as Epicurus proposed, an element of happiness is ataraxia, right? Which means freedom from fear or worry. He suggests that to be happy, we must turn away from external things. And minimalist living, it offers an example of what an Epicurean lifestyle might look like in today's internet-wide, satellite-covered global village. So the Epicurean philosophy, right, it can also be applied, I would say, to financial life. Because this philosophy stresses that happiness often comes from simple pleasure, therefore it is possible to find joy, ladies and gentlemen, without spending a great deal of money. Now, according to the Epicurean perspective, something that is pleasurable may actually become less enjoyable if it comes at a significant cost. For example, you may enjoy a cup of tea in a serene moment of stillness, but the experience might be, diminished, right? It would be substantially reduced if you spend beyond your budget and are now filled with worry about debt, right? So by avoiding costly luxuries and indulgences and living within a comfortable means, Epicureanism suggests that you might actually achieve a greater sense of fulfillment. Now, modern ideas of wellness that focus on things like self-care, mindful living, right, and living with intention, well, they sort of seem in sync with the Epicurean perspective. So, meditating on positivity, limiting self-imposed expectations, decluttering, as well as focusing on positive thinking, they're all ways to live well. So another area where we choose to live, where we can choose, I would say, where we can conscientiously try to live more positively is in our relationships as well as our friendships, right? Cultivating connections can, if managed realistically, right, they can bring us greater joy. Whereas lack of connection can lead to a sense of despair, right? And understand this that friendship is an important part of life. With the right friends, we can experience greater happiness and a sense of safety. We now know that the impact of friendship in modern life has a number of health benefits. Research shows that friendship increases our sense of belonging and purpose, right? It boosts our happiness, it reduces stress, and it can, improve self-confidence, right? So you are the net product of 4 or 5 people in your life. So having friends who are morally upright, virtuous, pragmatic, punctual, professional, who incite you to respect your elders and to show compassion to your young ones, right? Who motivate you to become positive denizens of the society. Well, I feel like such people are very rare nowadays, and wherever you find them, you gotta value them like a lot. right? So that's pretty much it for now, fellas. We'll be back in the upcoming sessions to talk a bit more about how to find purpose in our life. And until then, just feel free to reach out to me with any inquiries. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And you all stay blessed. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.